So, I mean, maybe I should step back a bit. The challenges for our communities, and this is in Canada and the United States and really globally for Indigenous communities who have suffered over the last 400 or 500 years strongly from the impacts of colonization. And with colonization came a certain type of economic system that's focused on extraction. The ultimate extraction is the taking of lands, but also that's part of slavery, and it's part of how these economic systems were created many hundreds of years ago, but they exist today, and this is still the modus operandi of financial institutions. So impact investing needs to show up differently in communities that are equity-deserving communities, for lack of a better word, especially Indigenous communities. And so investors are not used to working in that space, and there's a lot of, I think, anxiety, political correctness about how to go into these community work. And what we've found is that you need to build what we would call intermediaries who represent the community that they're trying to work with. And so you build those up, and those intermediaries give huge long-term value about where do you place money, how do you place it in a good way, how do you get good outcomes for the money that you're doing, and you're just not placing capital and extracting capital. So, I mean, when we talk about where Indigenous people are at, we're kind of in the pivot from surviving over a couple hundred years to thriving. So we're in this pivot space. It takes capital, and really risk-taking capital, to come in and see a different way to work. And when I say risk, it's the only real risk is they haven't worked in this space before. The actual investing in Indigenous people have an extraordinarily high rate of return on loans, and much more than the mainstream population, actually. So it's a falsity that there's risk attached to working in the Indigenous space. The risk is this: people just don't know, and they need to know. And so I think they need to get creative. It's not like putting your money into a diner down the street, right? That it's like, okay, I need different relationships. I need to work with people differently. I need other people to come alongside to make this happen. But the long-term benefit is quite extreme to the community. The one thing I've noticed about certain impact investors, and everyone somewhat different, but a kind of a general assessment, is that folks are really stuck in their categories. Meaning, you have a couple $1 billion of assets or $500 million in assets. You say, I'm going to invest in clean tech, and I'm going to invest in racial equity, and then I'm going to invest in whatever else. But they actually end up being fairly narrow bands, and they can't they need to open up these categorizations they have. If you want true inclusion, you just kind of have to give up your categories. And as much as you can, and here's where the really tricky part is you have to kind of give up your decision-making authority a little bit. It's a power dynamic that happens. And so if you can create ways where the decisions are made collaboratively, as opposed to just someone sitting in a big office tower making a decision, then I think you get something really robust out of that. You really get to change the game. And so if impact investing has really been around, well, fundamentally may have been around for hundreds of years, but really as we understand it today, kind of around 2007, 2006, it emerged as a way of just thinking about how money moves differently and does things for society. But if you think about its evolution, and it has evolved, that it needs to kind of give up its assumptions and say we need to rethink, be at the forefront and rethink how our money really operates. Then you can get more inclusion. You can bring different people in who weren't there, different finance models. Not everything is debt, not everything is equity, like a venture capital play. I say this because I'm a venture capitalist as well, but we're working into new ways now with community level. And so break down the barriers and silos that you put up inside. Because a lot of time we'll talk to large investors and they'll say, well, it really doesn't meet our investment strategy. Which is, it's kind of code in a way, but they need to kind of break that down and say, and just be open to hearing what people on the ground actually need to get the job done. The overriding thing is that capital is hard to find. Strange. There's a lot of money in the world, actually more than there has ever been to some degree. And they have a hard time interacting with money providers. So that's either mainstream finance or investors, private private equity, private market investors. And so, and they don't know how to get to it, because it tends to be like an elite club, right, of who knows where to get the money from. And I don't think investors want that either. To be honest, investors don't want to be in a situation where they're not seeing the best deals and the best things out of the most impact. So Indigenous communities are saying we need someone to interpret as well for them. Like, why do, and in our own investment processes, we've learned, like, we know because we're Indigenous people ourselves, but we've also learned that more patience is required, more flexibility in the structuration. It turns out that Indigenous founders and entrepreneurs don't always want to go to an IPO. That is not their goal. Their goal, actually, fundamentally for the majority of them, has been, how do I give back to my community? How do I put what I make, usually take care of yourself, take care of your family, and then say, now I want to give. I've heard people say to me, I want to give my company to the community. It's easier said than done. It's a bit of tricky business to kind of structure it, but it can be done, right? If you're listening to that they need money to show up differently. And in Raven, we use the term to have money act as medicine, not as extraction. If it can do that and be a little bit different, then you're kind of meeting the Indigenous community's needs. But overall, I want to see how people show up and what they're talking about. I mean, things change given the national, international politics, what's going on. How are people approaching investments right now? How are foundations, a lot of large foundations here, how are they approaching their asset base at this point in time? And how they're thinking about doing impact investing better and differently.